Hi everyone, Tony here for Immortality. Attention is all you need. Full paper read. Abstract. The dominant sequence transduction models are based on complex recurrent or convolutional neural networks that include an encoder and a decoder. The best performing models also connect the encoder and decoder through an attention mechanism. We propose a new simple network architecture, the transformer, based solely on the attention mechanism, dispensing with recurrence and convolutions entirely. Experiments on 2 machine translation tasks showed these models to be superior in quality while being more parallelizable and requiring significantly less time to train. Our model achieves 28.4 BLEU on the WMT 2014 English to German translation task, improving over the existing best results, including ensembles, by over 2 BLEU. On the WMT 2014 English to French translation task, our model establishes a new single model state-of-the-art BLEU score of 41.0 after training for 3.5 days on 8 GPUs, a small fraction of the training costs of the best models from the literature. So it removes the previous design was to have either a recurrent or convolutional neural network and an attention mechanism. So RNNs, they're still around, they're still used. A recurrent because they have a feedback loop that allows information to flow from one step to the next. So RNNs process input sequences one step at a time, using the previous steps to inform the current step. The output of the previous step is fed back into the network to influence the current step. RNNs maintain a hidden state. They're stateful. So they capture the information from previous steps, allowing them to learn long-term dependencies. So they have a kind of a memory. Convolutional neural networks handle data in a grid-like topology, such as images where you have a grid. They are commonly used for computer vision tasks such as image clarification or object detection. The attention mechanism is a technique used in neural networks to allow the model to focus on specific parts of the input data when making prediction. The attention mechanism computes a weighted sum of the input data where weights are learned during training. So the transformer model relies solely on the attention mechanism and eliminates recurrence and convolutions. If you've heard of Mumbo brings back the CNN, the convolutional neural network, and combines it with the transformer. Is that what you want? I don't think it's a matter of what you want. I think it's what produces the best result in evaluation. Models that use not all of AI uses neural networks. There are many subfields of artificial intelligence. A class of them use neural networks. And that usually involves training data, passing it through the neural network, and training up the neural network. And this specific area of artificial intelligence is called deep learning, which differs from reinforcement learning, which doesn't use training data, which doesn't have that same system. So RNNs, CNNs, transformers, and Mumbo fall under the category of deep learning. within the field of artificial intelligence. And deep learning is further a subfield of machine learning. Introduction. Recurrent neural networks, long, short-term memory, and gated recurrent neural networks in particular have been firmly established as state-of-the-art approaches in sequence modeling and transduction problems such as language modeling and machine translation. Numerous efforts have since continued to push the boundaries of recurrent language models and encoder-decoder architecture. Recent models typically factor computation along the symbol positions of the input and output sequences, aligning the positions to steps in computation time. They generate a sequence of hidden states, H subscript T, as a function of the previous hidden state, H subscript T minus 1, and the input for position T will be time. This inherently sequential nature precludes parallelization within training examples, which becomes critical at longer sequence lengths as memory constraints limit batching across examples. Recent work has achieved significant improvements in computational efficiency through factorization tricks and conditional computation, while also improving model performance in case of the latter. The fundamental constraint of sequential computation, however, remains. Attention mechanisms have become an integral part of compelling sequence modeling and transduction models in various tasks, allowing modeling of dependencies without regard of their distance in the input or output sequences. In all but a few cases, however, such attention mechanisms are used in conjunction with a recurrent network. In this work, we propose the transformer, a model architecture eschewing recurrence and instead relying entirely on an attention mechanism to draw global dependencies between input and output. The transformer allows for significantly more parallelization and can reach a new state-of-the-art in translation quality after being trained for as little as 12 hours on 8 P100 GPUs. So a bottleneck of the recurrent network is that it's not parallelizable as much as the transformer model, which is much more parallelizable, which means how much resources you're going to need to train these models, because you want to get a big model or a big enough model that it's that you're not straining for effectiveness due to model size. Background. The goal of reducing sequential computation also forms the foundation of the extended neural GPU ByteNet with ConvS2S, all of which use convolutional neural networks as basic building block, computing hidden representations in parallel for all input and output positions. In these models, the number of operations required to relay signals from two arbitrary input or output position grows in the distance between positions, linearly for ConvS2S and logarithmically for ByteNet. This makes it more difficult to learn dependencies between distant positions. In the transformer, this is reduced to a constant number of operations, albeit at the cost of reduced effective resolution due to averaging attention-weighted position, an effect we counteract with multi-head attention as described in section 3.2. Self-attention, sometimes referred to intra-attention, is an attention mechanism relating different positions of a single sequence in order to compute representations of a sequence. Self-attention has been used successfully in a variety of tasks, including reading comprehension, abstractive summarization, textual entailment, and learning task-independent sentence representations. End-to-end memory networks are based on a recurrent attention mechanism instead of sequence-aligned recurrence, and have been shown to perform well on simple language question answering and language modeling tasks. To the best of our knowledge, however, the transformer is the first transduction model relying entirely on self-attention to compute representations of its input and output without using sequence-aligned RNNs or convolution. In the following sections, we will describe the transformer, motivate self-attention and discuss its advantages over models such as 14, 15, and 8. The two big advantages of transformers that they solve versus CNNs and RNNs is parallelization, which makes them faster to train. CNNs and RNNs were sequential. And the other one is handling long-range dependencies. Long-range dependencies refers to relationships between elements that are far apart in a sequence. Multi-head attention allows the model to process different parts of the input sequence simultaneously and in parallel, improving performance. So they're the two big takeaways from the transformer model, in that the parallelization improves performance schematically, and capturing the long-range dependencies potentially results in a more quality output. Attention refers to a mechanism that allows the model to weigh the importance of different input elements relative to each other and to the output sequence. This is achieved by computing a weighted sum of input elements, where the weights are learned during training and reflect the relative importance of each element. So how would you understand that? It's looking for associations. It's training on associations. Model architecture. Most competitive neural sequence transduction models have an encoder-decoder structure. Here, the encoder maps an input sequence of simple representations. Symbol representations, x1 to xn, to a sequence of continuous representations, z equals z1 to zn. Given z, the decoder then generates an output sequence, y1 to ym, of symbols one element at a time. At each step, the model is autoregressive, consuming the previous generated symbols as additional input when generating the next. The transformer follows this overall architecture using stacked self-attention and point-wise fully connected layers for both encoder and decoder, shown in the left, right halves of figure 1 respectively. Encoder-decoder stacks 3.1. Encoder. The encoder is composed of a stack of n equals 6 identical layers. Each layer has 2 sublayers. The first is a multi-head self-attention mechanism, and the second is a symbol positioned wise, fully connected feed-forward network. We employ a residual connection around each of the 2 sublayers, followed by layer normalization. That is, the output of each sublayer is layer norm x plus sublayer x, where sublayer x is the function implemented by the sublayer itself to facilitate these residual connections or sublayers in the model, as well as the embedding layers produce outputs of dimension d model equals 512. Decoder. The decoder is also composed of a stack of n equals 6 identical layers. In addition to the 2 sublayers in each encoded layer, the decoder inserts a 3rd sublayer, which performs multi-head attention over the output of the encoder stack. Similar to the encoder, we employ residual connections around each of the sublayers, followed by layer normalization. We also modify the self-attention sublayer in the decoder stack to prevent position from being attended to subsequent positions. This masking, combined with the fact that the output embeddings are offset by 1 position, ensures that the predictions for the position I can depend only on the known outputs at positions less than I. Okay. Attention, 3.2. An attention function can be described as mapping a query and a set of key value pairs to an output, where the query keys, values, and outputs are all vectors. The output is computed as a weighted sum of the values, where the weight assigned to each value is computed by a compatibility function of the query with the corresponding key. So it's just some kind of word association where it's remarkable in its ability to be comprehensionable. Like, is that the core of language? Is it just acceptable association of words? Dogs can't do that. I look at my dog and I say, the chatbot can answer a question. Why can't you answer a question? Is the chatbot smarter than a dog? 3.2.1 scale dot product attention. We call our particular attention scale dot product attention. The input consists of queries and keys of dimensions D subscript K and values of dimension D subscript V. We compute the dot products of the scale dot product versus multi-head attention consists of several attention layers running in parallel. Query with all keys, divide each key by the square root of dk, and apply a softmax function to obtain the weights on the values. In practice, we compute the attention function on a set of queries simultaneously, packed together into a matrix Q. The keys and values are also packed together into matrices K and V. We compute the matrix of output as attention QKV equals softmax QK to the power of T over the square root of dk times V. The two most commonly used attention functions are additive attention and dot product multiplicative attention. Dot product attention is identical to our algorithm except for the scaling factor of 1 over the square root of dk. Additive attention computes the compatibility function using a feed-forward network with a single header layer. While the two are similar in theoretical complexity, dot product attention is much faster and more space efficient in practice since it can be implemented using highly optimized matrix multiplication code. While for some small values of D subscript K, the two mechanisms perform similarly, additive attention outperforms dot product attention without scaling for larger values of D subscript K. We suspect that for large values of dk, the dot products grow large in magnitude, pushing the softmax function into regions where it has extremely small gradients. To counteract this effect, we scale the dot products by 1 over square root of D subscript K. 3.22 multi-head attention. Instead of performing a single attention function with D model minus dimension keys, values, and queries, we found it beneficial to linearly project the queries, keys, and values H times with different learned linear projections to dk, and dv dimensions respectively. On each of these projected versions of queries, keys, and values, we then perform the attention function in parallel, yielding D subscript V minus dimensional output values. These are concatenated and once again projected, resulting in the final values as depicted in figure 2. Multi-head attention allows the model to jointly attend to information from different representation subspaces at different positions with a single attention head. Averaging inhibits this. In this work, we employ H equals 8 parallel attention layers or heads For each of these we use a formula. Due to the reduced dimension of each head, the total computational cost is similar to that of single head attention with full dimensionality. So that's the model, but who cares what the model is as long as it works? How many variations of models can be tested through a computer system to yield a model that even surpasses the transformer model? The model architecture is infinitely mutatable with full evaluation. 3.2.3 Applications of attention in our model. The transformer uses multi-head attention in 3 different ways. In encoder, decoder attention layers, the queries come from the previous decoder layer, and the memory keys and values come from the output of the encoder. This allows every position in the decoder to attend over all positions in the input sequence. This mimics the typical encoder-decoder attention mechanism in the sequence-to-sequence models, such as the encoder contains self-attention layers. In a self-attention layer, all of the keys, values, and queries come from the same place. In this case, the output of the previous layer in the encoder. Each position in the encoder can attend to all position in the previous layer of the encoder. Similarly, self-attention layers in the decoder allows each position in the decoder to attend to all positions in the decoder up to and including that position. We need to prevent leftward information flow in the decoder to preserve the autoregressive property. We implement this inside of scale.product attention by masking out setting to negative infinity all values in the input of the softmax which correspond to illegal connections. 3.3 Position-wise feed-forward networks. In addition to attention sublayers, each of the layers in our encoder-decoder contains a fully connected feed-forward network which is applied to each position separately and identically. This consists of 2 linear transformations with a ReLU activation in between. Formula. While the linear transformations are the same across different positions, they use different parameters from layer to layer. Another way of describing this is as 2 convolutions with kernel size 1s. The dimensionality of input and output is the D model equals 512, and the inner layer has dimensionality of DFF equals 2048. Embedding in softmax 3.4. Similarly to other sequence transduction models, we use learned embeddings to convert the input tokens and output tokens of vectors of dimensions D model. We also use the usual learned linear transformation and softmax function to convert the decoder output to predicted next token probabilities. In our model, we share the same weight matrix between the 2 embedding layers and the pre-softmax linear transformation similar to 24. In the embedding layers, we multiply those weights by the square root of the D model. 3.5 Positional encoding. Since our model contains no recurrence and no convolution, in order for the model to make use of the order of the sequence, we must inject some information about the relative or absolute position of the tokens in the sequence. To this end, we add positional encodings to the input embeddings at the bottoms of the encoder and decoder stacks. Positional encodings have the same dimension D model as the embeddings so that the 2 can be summed. There are many choices of positional encodings, learned and fixed. So table 1, maximum path lengths per layer complexity and minimum number of sequential operations for different layer types. N is the sequence length and D is the representation dimension K is the kernel size of convolutions, and R is the size of the neighborhood in restricted self-attention.
Wait.
So that the self-attention mechanism is more efficient, uses less computer resources. And performs better. In this work, we use sine and cosine functions of different frequencies, where pos is the position and I is the dimension, that is, each dimension of the positional encoding corresponds to a sinusoid. The wavelengths form a geometric progression from 2 pi to 10,000 times 2 pi. We chose this function because we hypothesized it would allow the model to easily learn to attend by relative position, since for any fixed offset k, p and e pos plus k can be represented as a linear function of p e pos. So we also experimented with using learned positional embeddings instead, and found that two versions produce nearly identical results. We chose the sinusoidal version because it may allow the model to extrapolate to sequence lengths longer than the ones encountered during trainings. So that's why they replace convolutional and recurrent aspects of the model with positional embeddings. 4. Why self-attention? In this section, we compare various aspects of self-attentional layers to the recurrent and convolutional layers commonly used for mapping one variable length sequence of symbol representation, x1 to xn, to another sequence of equal length c1 to zn, with xi, zi, such as a hidden layer in a typical sequence transduction encoder or decoder. Motivating our use of self-attention, we consider 3 desiderata. One is the total computational complexity per layer. Another is the amount of computation that can be parallelized, as measured by the minimum number of sequential operations required. The third is the path length between two long-range dependencies in the network. Learning long-range dependencies is a key challenge in many sequence transductions tasks. One key factor affecting the ability to learn such dependencies is the length of the paths forward and backward signals have to traverse in the network. The shorter these paths between any combination of positions in the input and output sequence, the easier it is to learn long-range dependencies. Hence, we also compare the maximum path lengths between any two input and output positions in networks composed of different layer types. As noted in Table 1, a self-attention layer connects all positions with a constant number of sequentially executed operations, whereas a recurrent layer requires O times N sequential operations. In terms of computational complexity, self-attention layers are faster than recurrent layers when the sequence length n is smaller than the representation dimensionality d, which is most often the case with sentence representation used by state-of-the-art models in machine translations, such as word piece and byte pair representations. To improve computational performance for tasks involving very long sequence, self-attention could be restricted to considering only a neighborhood of size r in the input sequence centered around the respective output position. This would increase the maximum pair length to O(n) over r. We plan to investigate this approach further in future work. A single convolutional layer with kernel width k is less than n does not connect all pairs of input and output positions. Doing so requires a stack of O(n) over k convolutional layers in the case of contiguous kernels, or O log k times n in the case of diluted convolutions. increasing the length of the longest paths between any two positions in the network. Convolutional layers are generally more expensive than recurrent layers by a factor of k. Separable convolutions, however, decrease the complexity considerably to O to the k times n times d plus n times d to the power of 2. Even with k equals n, however, the complexity of a separable convolution is equal to the combination of a self-retention layer and a point-wise feed-forward layer, the approach we take in our model. As side benefit, self-retention could yield more interpretable models. We inspect attention distributions from our models and present and discuss examples in the appendix. Not only do individual attention heads clearly learn to perform different tasks, many appear to exhibit behavior related to the syntactic and semantic structure of sentences. 5. Training. This section describes the training regime for our models. 5.1 Training data and batching. We trained on the standard WMT 2014 English to German dataset consisting of about 4.5 million sentence pairs. Sentences were encoded using byte pair encoding, which has a shared source target vocabulary of about 37,000 tokens. For English-French, we used the significantly larger WMT 2014 English to French dataset consisting of 36 million sentences and split tokens into a 32,000 word piece vocabulary. Sentence pairs were batched together by approximate sequence length. Each training batch contained a set of sentence pairs containing approximately 25,000 source tokens and 25,000 target tokens. 5.2 Hardware and schedule. We trained our models on one machine with 8 NVIDIA P100 GPUs. For our base models using the hyperparameters described throughout the paper, each training step took about 0.4 seconds. We trained the base models for a total of 100,000 steps or 12 hours. For our big models described on the bottom line of table 3, step time was 1 second. The big models were trained for 300,000 steps, 3.5 days. Getting Google's skimping there, P100 GPU. Yeah, these guys are in the mail room. 5.3 optimizer. We use the Atom optimizer with B1 equals 0.9, B2 is 0.98, E equals 10.9. We vary the learning rate over the course of training according to the formula. This corresponds to increasing the learning rate linearly for the first warm-up steps, training steps, and decreasing it thereafter proportionally to the inverse square root of the step number. We use warm-up steps 4,000. Warm-up steps equals 4,000. 5.4 Regularization. We employ 3 types of regularization during training. Residual dropout. We apply dropout to the output of each sublayer before it is added to the sublayer input and normalized. In addition, we apply dropout to the sums of the embeddings and the positional encodings in both the encoder-decoder stacks. For the base model, we use the rate of P drop equals 0.1. Table 2, the transformer achieves better BLEU scores than previous state-of-the-art models on English to German and English to French. Muse test 2014 tests at a fraction of the training cost. So they're the different models and their makeup, and there's the transformer model that is scoring the highest on English to French on the BLEU. Not by much, but significant. And but not on the English to French. The VS2S ensemble scores higher. The training cost, however, is much better. Not entirely, but sometimes significant, sometimes not. How much better is this model than some of these other architectures? They come pretty close in this chart, and transformers aren't so far ahead of these other models. They're only a fraction better than these other models. I guess that's the way it works. Label smoothing. During training, we employed label smoothing of value. This hurts perplexity, as the model learns to be more unsure but improves accuracy and BLEU score. 6 results. 6.1 machine translation. On the WMT 2014 English to German translation task, the big transformer model, transformer big table, outperforms the best previously reported models, including ensembles, by more than 2 BLEU, establishing a new state-of-the-art BLEU score of 28.4. The configuration of this model is listed in the bottom line of Table 3. Training took 3.5 days on 8 P100 GPUs. Even our base model surpasses all previously published models and ensembles at a fraction of the training cost of any of the comparative models. On the WMT 2014 English to French translation tasks, our big model achieves a BLEU score of 41.0, outperforming all of the previously published single models at less than a quarter of the training cost of the previous state-of-the-art model. The transformer big model trained for English to French used dropout rate P drop equals 0.1 instead of 0.3. For the base models, we used a single model obtained by averaging the last 5 checkpoints, which were written at 10-minute intervals. For the big models, we averaged the last 20 checkpoints. We used beam search with a beam size of 4 and a length penalty alpha equals 0.6. These hyperparameters were chosen after experimentation on the development set. We set the maximum output length during inference to an input size plus 50, but terminate early when possible. Table 2 summarizes our results and compares our translation quality and training cost to other model architectures from the literature. We estimate the number of floating point operations used to train a model by multiplying the training time, the number of GPUs used, and an estimate of the sustained single position floating point capacity of each GPU. 6.2 Model variations. To evaluate the importance of different components of the transformer, we varied our base model in different ways, measuring the change in performance on English to German translation on the development set. New test 2013. We used beam search as described in the previous section, but no checkpoint averaging. We present the results in Table 3. Table 3, rows A, we vary the number of attention heads and the attention key and value dimensions, keeping the amount of computation constant as described in section 3.22. While single head attention is 0.9 BLEU worse than the best setting, quality also drops off with too many heads. To Table 3, variations of the transformer architecture. Unlisted values are identical to those of the base model. All metrics are on the English to German translation development set used at 2013. Listed perplexities are per word piece according to our byte pair encoding and should not be compared to per word perplexities. In Table 3, rows B, we observe that reducing the attention size D subscript K hurts model quality. It suggests that determining compatibility is not easy and that a more sophisticated compatibility function and dot product may be beneficial. We further observe in rows C and D that, as expected, bigger models are better, and dropout is very helpful in avoiding overfitting. In rows E, we replace our sinusoidal positioning encoding with learned positional embeddings and observe nearly identical results to the base model. 7. Conclusion. In this work, we presented the transformer, first sequence transduction model based entirely on attention, replacing the recurrent layers most commonly used in encoder-decoder architectures with multi-headed self-attention. For translation tasks, the transformer can be trained significantly faster than architectures based on recurrent or convolutional layers. On both WMT 2014 English to German and WMT 2014 English to French translation tasks, we achieve a new state-of-the-art. In the former task, our best model outperforms even all previously reported ensembles. We are excited about the future of attention-based models and plan to apply them to other tasks. We plan to extend the transformer to problems involving input and output modalities other than text and investigate local restricted attention mechanism to effectively handle large inputs and outputs such as images, audio, and video. Making generation less sequential is another research goal of ours. The code we use to train and evaluate our models is available at TensorFlow, Tensor to Tensor. References, more references. Look how much work they've done to it. Like, how much of it is about attention is all you need? Or is it about something else?
Meets the eye. Autobots wage their battle to destroy the evil forces of the Decepticons, the Transformers. Robots in disguise. The Transformers. More than meets the eye. The Transformers.
So there it is. Attention is all you need. Tony, over and out.